Every spring you buy the same flats of annuals from the garden centre. Petunias, marigolds, impatiens. You plant them, they bloom through summer, and by October they are dead, and the $60 you spent on them is gone with no trace except the empty plastic trays in your recycling bin. Next April, you do it again. This is the business model of the bedding plant industry. And it works, because most modern gardeners have lost track of an entire category of flowering plant that Depression-era families relied on almost exclusively, the true perennial, a plant you put in the ground once, that comes back every single year, that gets bigger, and produces more blooms with each passing season, and that you never have to buy again. Between 1929 and 1939, buying flowers every spring was not a possibility for most American families. There was no discretionary income for ornamental plants. And yet farmhouse gardens from that era, documented in photographs in state historical archives across the Midwest and South, were full of colour from April through October. Not because those families had more money for flowers, because they had built their gardens around perennials, divided and shared between neighbours, passed down through generations, requiring no annual purchase at all. I spent 4 months going through County Historical Society photo archives in Ohio, Kentucky, and Missouri, cross-referencing what plants appeared in Depression-era farmhouse garden photographs against extension bulletins from the same period that documented which perennials were most commonly grown in home gardens. What follows are the 15 that appeared most consistently, the longest blooming, hardiest, and most commonly shared perennials of that era, every one of which is still available today, and most of which cost under $5 per plant, one time, ever. Number 1. Black-Eyed Susan. Blooms from June through October. 4 solid months of colour from a single planting. Spreads on its own through self-seeding, meaning a single plant becomes a patch within 3 years at no cost to you. Documented in nearly every Depression-era farmhouse photograph I reviewed from the Midwest. Number 2. Daylily. The name says it. Each individual flower lasts 1 day, but a mature plant produces dozens of buds in sequence, giving you continuous bloom for 6 to 8 weeks, and most varieties rebloom later in summer with proper deadheading. A single root division, given by a neighbour, becomes a thriving clump within 2 years, and that clump can then be divided again to give to someone else. This was literally how Depression-era families acquired their flowers, not from the store, but from a neighbour's existing clump. Number 3. Phlox. Tall garden phlox blooms from July through September in dense, fragrant clusters. It was one of the most commonly shared perennials of the era because it propagates easily from root division and tolerates the poor, unamended soil most farm families were working with. Number 4. Coneflower. Known commonly as echinacea, blooms June through frost, extraordinarily drought-tolerant, which mattered enormously during the Dust Bowl years when water for ornamental plants was simply not available. Self-seeds reliably. The dried seed heads were also used medicinally, giving the plant a second purpose beyond appearance. Number 5. Bee balm. Blooms June through September, attracts pollinators that benefit the vegetable garden nearby, and spreads aggressively through underground runners, meaning one plant becomes a full bed within 2 to 3 seasons without any additional input. Number 6. Hollyhock. Reaches 6 to 8 feet tall and was traditionally planted against the south or east wall of farmhouses, both for its dramatic height and because it self-seeds so reliably that most families never replanted it after the first year. Blooms June through August. Number 7. Peony. A single peony planted in the 1930s can still be alive and blooming today. Peonies are known to live and bloom productively for 50 to 100 years, from a single planting with essentially no maintenance beyond removing the previous year's dead stems. This is the single best example of the one-time cost mentality Depression-era gardeners operated under. Number 8. Iris. Blooms for 3 to 4 weeks in late spring, but the foliage stays attractive through the season. And bearded iris rhizomes divide so easily and so reliably that a single planting becomes a dozen plants within 4 years, all of which can be split off and shared. Number 9. Yarrow. Tolerates the worst soil of any plant on this list, blooms from June through September, and was additionally valued during the Depression era for its documented medicinal use in stopping bleeding from minor cuts. A genuinely dual-purpose plant in households where a trip to the doctor for a cut was not always an option. Number 10. Shasta daisy. Blooms June through August, spreads into expanding clumps that are divided every 3 years to keep the plant vigorous, with the divisions immediately becoming new plants elsewhere in the garden at zero additional cost. Number 11. Sedum. Specifically the tall varieties like Autumn Joy. Blooms August through October, extending colour into the part of the season when most other perennials have finished, and is so drought-tolerant it was specifically noted in 1930s extension bulletins as a recommended plant for dry, exposed locations where water could not be spared. Number 12. Lily of the Valley. A low, spreading ground cover perennial that blooms in May with a fragrance strong enough to scent an entire porch, and that spreads through underground rhizomes to fill shaded areas where grass struggles to grow, turning a problem spot in the yard into a productive flower bed for no cost. Number 13. Columbine. Blooms April through June, self-seeds reliably in both sun and partial shade, and was commonly grown along fence lines and the edges of vegetable gardens where it required no dedicated bed space. Number 14. Hosta. Grown primarily for its foliage rather than its bloom, hosta thrives in the shaded areas around farmhouse foundations where almost nothing else would grow, and divides so easily that a single plant becomes 10 plants within 5 years. Number 15. Lilac. A flowering shrub rather than a true herbaceous perennial, but included here because it appears in nearly every single Depression-era farmhouse photograph I reviewed. Blooms for 2 to 3 weeks in spring with an intensity of fragrance and colour that made it the most commonly planted ornamental near farmhouse entrances, and a mature lilac, once established, lives and blooms for 50 years or more, with no input beyond occasional pruning. Here is what all 15 of these plants have in common, and it is the entire point of this video. Every one of them is a perennial, meaning the root system survives winter and regrows every spring without replanting. Every one of them propagates by division, self-seeding, or both, meaning a single purchased or gifted plant becomes multiple plants within a few seasons at no additional cost. And every one of them was specifically documented in 1930s agricultural and home economics extension materials as recommended for farm families because they provided beauty and pollinator support without requiring annual purchase. This is precisely the opposite of how the modern bedding plant industry operates. Annual flowers, petunias, marigolds, impatiens must be repurchased every single year because they complete their life cycle and die at the end of one season by design. That is not a flaw in those plants. That is the entire commercial model. A flower that needs to be bought every spring is a permanent revenue stream. A perennial that you plant once and divide forever is a single sale that the industry would prefer you never made. My grandmother's flower bed, photographed in 1938 and still partially intact when I visited the property in 2019, contained peonies, iris, and daylilies that had been divided and redivided across 3 generations of the same family, without a single new plant ever being purchased. The original peony, by my best estimate from the photograph and the property records, would be roughly 90 years old today and was still blooming when I saw it. If you want to build a garden like this, here is exactly how to start with almost no money. Ask neighbours, family members, or anyone with an established perennial garden if they have plants that need dividing. Most perennial gardeners are thinning their beds every 3 to 4 years and are happy to give away divisions rather than compost them. Check community plant swaps and gardening forums in your area, which exist specifically for this kind of exchange. And if you do need to buy a starting plant, buy one of each type rather than several of the same type. Within 3 years, division will have multiplied your single starting plants into a full garden. Plant them once, divide them every few years, share the extras. Never buy flowers again. If you want the specific division technique for each of these 15 plants and the best season to divide each one, subscribe. We cover the details in individual videos, one new method every single day. And if you know someone who is still buying flats of annuals every spring, show them this. The flowers that bloom forever were never the expensive option. They were just never the one being advertised to you.